One day, a professor walked into class holding a large glass jar. Without saying a word, he filled it with big rocks until no more could fit. Then he smiled and asked his students, "Is this jar full?" Everyone said yes, but they were wrong. He then added pebbles, then sand, and finally water, each time proving there was still more space. Then he said something that left the class silent. "This jar represents your life. If you fill it first with the small things, the sand and pebbles, you'll never have space for what truly matters. Your family, your health, your dreams. These are your rocks. So ask yourself, what's really filling your jar?"
One quiet morning, a professor walked into his classroom carrying a large, transparent glass jar. The students looked at him curiously. They had no idea what kind of lesson was about to unfold. There was always something different about this professor, a spark in his eyes that showed wisdom, not just knowledge. Without saying a word, he placed the jar on the table. Then, from under his desk, he brought out a few large rocks, each one about the size of a fist. Slowly, carefully, he began putting the rocks inside the jar, one by one. The students watched in silence. After a few moments, the jar was filled to the top. The professor looked up and asked, "Is this jar full now?" The students examined it and nodded. "Yes, sir, it's full." The professor smiled quietly. He reached under the table again and pulled out a small bag filled with tiny pebbles. Without saying a word, he poured them into the jar. Then he gently shook it. The pebbles rolled down and filled the gaps between the rocks. He looked at his students again. "How about now? Is it full?" Some hesitated. Others smiled and said, "Now it's really full, sir." The professor chuckled softly. He then reached for another bag, this one filled with fine sand. He poured the sand into the jar, and the grain slipped into every tiny space left between the rocks and pebbles. He asked again, "Is it full now?" This time, the class laughed. "Probably," they said, but the professor wasn't done. He lifted a small mug of water and poured it into the jar. The water seeped down to the sand, slowly filling every remaining space. He smiled. "Now," he said, "the jar is truly full." Then he looked around the room, his voice calm and full of meaning. "My friends, this jar represents your life. The big rocks," he said, "are the most important things in your life. Your family, your health, your dreams, your closest relationships. Even if you lost everything else, as long as you still have these rocks, your life will still feel complete." He paused for a moment, letting the silence sink in. "The pebbles," he continued, "represent other meaningful things. Your job, your house, your car, your degree. They matter too, but not as much as your rocks. And the sand," he said softly, "represents all the little things that keep you busy. Scrolling through social media, gossiping, online shopping, or worrying about things that won't matter in a year." He turned to the students and asked, "Now tell me, what would happen if I poured the sand first?" The class thought for a moment, and one student replied, "There would be no room for the rocks." The professor nodded. "That's exactly right. If you fill your life with small things first, you won't have space left for what truly matters." He walked to the board and wrote 4 words in big letters. "Place your rocks first," he said. "Your rocks are your life's foundation. They give meaning and stability to everything else. If you ignore them, if you keep chasing small distractions, you'll one day look back and realize you left out the most important parts of life." Then he looked up again, his eyes soft but serious. "At the end of your journey, it's not the sand that will define your life, not your gadgets, your likes, or your possessions. It's the rocks, the people you love, the dreams you pursued, and the health that allowed you to live with energy and purpose." He paused, letting the words settle like still water. "So," he said gently, "fill your life with things that nourish your soul, not just things that fill your schedule." Just then, one student raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "what does the water represent?" The professor smiled. Ah, good question, he said. The water represents the small joys, the little moments that make life sweeter, like sharing tea with a friend, watching the sunset, listening to your favorite song, or laughing with the people you love. He looked around the classroom and said softly, "No matter how busy life gets, there's always room for these moments. Always." He picked up the jar again and held it in his hands. "This," he said, "is your life. It may look full, but what fills it, that's your choice. In our lives, we often fill the jar with sand first. We waste our time worrying about what others think, scrolling through endless feeds, or chasing small things that don't bring true happiness. Then, when life feels empty, we wonder why. But the truth is simple. We forgot to place our rocks first. Your rocks are your priorities, the things that give your life meaning. Your family, your health, your passions, your purpose. When you start with those, everything else, the pebbles, the sand, even the water, will still find its place. But if you start with the small stuff, you'll never have room for what truly matters. So today, ask yourself, what are the rocks in your life? Have you given them enough space? Or are you letting the sand take over? Remember, life isn't about being busy. It's about being meaningful. It's not about counting the days. It's about making the days count. Create your balance. Protect your rocks. Enjoy your water moments. And let your jar, your life, be full of meaning, not just movement. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes, a simple story is all it takes to remind us what truly matters.